A few months ago, I finally gave in to the ongoing public demand. Typically, I steer clear of race-related topics on this channel, but the requests kept pouring in. I had always avoided these subjects because I didn't want the comment section to turn into a battleground of racist remarks. However, people pointed out that it's not just racists who are curious about the demographics of an area. Individuals of various racial backgrounds often want to know where they can live in proximity to their preferred restaurants, stores, and cultural festivals. Today, we're turning our attention to the states with the largest white populations, because fairness is essential. We'll examine the percentage of the population that is classified as white, and we'll also delve into the European groups that initially settled in these areas. All of this information is based on U.S. Census data. Before diving into the list, here's a quick history lesson. In 1565, the Spanish arrived in St. Augustine, Florida. Then, on November 11, 1620, the Mayflower landed. While there are numerous stories about other explorers, such as the Russians in Alaska, the key moments in North American colonization often highlighted in history books are the arrival of the Mayflower and the Spanish settlement in St. Augustine. Whatever the exact events, white settlers came to dominate, and what is now the United States has remained predominantly white ever since. Today, we're looking at 10 states where these demographic percentages have remained relatively unchanged since the 1700s. Got it? Good. Let's dive in. Number 10. Nebraska. Nebraska is remarkably white, earning its spot on our list. By the 1870s, Nebraska saw an influx of European immigrants, with approximately 25% of its residents born abroad. Danes, Swedes, Irish, Germans, and Czechs were among the early settlers. To further illustrate just how white Nebraska is, consider this. The top male names in the state are Oliver, Henry, Liam, and Theodore. Currently, 88.1% of Nebraska's population is white. Number 9. Montana. Montana is also heavily populated by those with blonde hair and blue eyes. Initially, Italians and Germans settled in Fergus and Park counties, with many Germans coming from North Dakota and Canada. Meanwhile, many English and Scottish individuals established cattle farms. Back then, the English and Scottish worked the cattle, while Germans typically owned the land. There were also a significant number of sheep farmers, predominantly from the British Isles, who contributed to making Montana the state it is today. Today, 88.9% of Montana's population is white. Number 8. Utah. If you didn't already know that Utah is predominantly white, you've likely never stepped inside a Mormon temple. Mormons, who make up about 70% of Utah's population, have a long history of being overwhelmingly white. In the early days, Spanish explorers, French-Canadian fur traders, and British traders briefly explored Utah before 1847. That year marked the arrival of Mormon immigrants from Britain, Canada, Denmark, and Norway, who were part of the Mormon exodus from Illinois and became the first non-Native American settlers in what would later become the Beehive State. Today, 90.6% of Utah's population is classified as white. Number 7. Iowa. Iowa is another state that is extremely white, a fact that becomes apparent if you've ever attended a county fair there. Before researching this video, I honestly thought Iowa would take the number 1 spot. Having visited Iowa a few times, I can say it's probably the whitest state I've ever seen, at least in my opinion. However, the statistics place Iowa at number 7. In the early days, around the 1840s, the majority of settlers in Iowa came from Scandinavian countries, as well as Dutch, German, Irish, Scottish, and Welsh backgrounds. New Englanders and Quakers also started arriving around that time. By 1846, Mormons had also begun to settle in Iowa. Today, 90.6% of Iowa's population is white. Number 6. Wyoming. 6 groups of immigrants made up the early settlers of Wyoming: the British, Germans, Italians, Basques, and Greeks. By 1870, immigrants from the British Isles represented about 1/5 of Wyoming's territorial population and over half of its foreign-born residents. The British arrived in large numbers, and in recent decades, Wyoming has grown in popularity. Today, 92.5% of Wyoming's population identifies as white. Number 5. Idaho. Idaho has a long-standing reputation for being very white, and it has been that way for a long time. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a large majority of settlers were English, many arriving before statehood. For many English settlers from jolly old England, Idaho seemed like an ideal place because there wasn't much government interference back then. With many English residents facing heavy taxation, a place with minimal government seemed attractive. Today, 93% of Idaho's population is white. Number 4. New Hampshire. New Hampshire's ranking should come as no surprise to anyone who has visited the state. If you live there, you're already aware of this. We're talking about a state where people consider Taco Bell to be a symbol of diversity. Being part of New England, New Hampshire's roots trace back to the colonial era, primarily inhabited by British residents. By 1799, they were joined by a significant number of Scottish and Irish immigrants. Interestingly, for a long time, there was a substantial French-Canadian presence in New Hampshire, with many immigrants coming down from Quebec for the textile mills. These days, 93.1% of New Hampshire's population is white. Number 3. West Virginia. West Virginia is unique. I expected the percentage of white residents to be even higher, especially since West Virginia's cities lack diversity compared to other parts of the U.S. in the rural areas, particularly the mountains and hollers. There is virtually no diversity. Settlement in present-day West Virginia began in the mid-1700s when Scottish, Irish, and German settlers from Pennsylvania moved into what are now Berkeley and Greenbrier counties. Scottish and Irish cultures have strongly influenced West Virginia, particularly in the region's folk music. Today, 93.5% of West Virginia's population is white. Number 2. Vermont. Everything I just said about New Hampshire applies to Vermont as well. These neighboring states often appear close together on various rankings, whether it's crime stats, school performance, or economic indicators. Vermont, like New Hampshire, was originally settled by English, Irish, and Scottish immigrants. Many French Canadians also moved down from Quebec. Today, 94.2% of Vermont's population is white. Before we get to number 1, don't forget to subscribe the channel. Press the bell icon for more interesting videos. Number 1. Maine. New England dominates this list with 3 states in the top 4, and Maine takes the top spot. If you've ever been to New England, this might not be surprising, especially when it comes to Maine. Portland, Maine's largest city, has fewer than 70,000 residents, and the entire metro area has about 556,000 people. The city of Portland is 91.27% white, which is quite high for a city. For comparison, the other Portland, Oregon, has a white population of about 76%. Oregon, by the way, nearly made this list, coming in at number 14. While Portland, Oregon is much larger, the comparison is still interesting. Overall, the Pine Tree State has a population that is 94.4% white. That's all for today's video. I hope you found this information helpful. If we do another video like this, what race, culture, or religion should we focus on next? Have a great day, and remember to be kind to one another.